Coach, if you struggle with parents in your program, whether you are a coach at the college level, the high school level, or youth level, be sure to get a copy of my latest book, The Sports Parent Solution: Proven Strategies for Transforming Parents from Obstacles to Allies. The groundbreaking book gives you the strategies and methods you need to transform the parent culture in your team, allowing you to better support each athlete's growth, improve your team's performance, and create an extraordinary experience for all involved, all while taking your program to a whole new level. It's available on Amazon and Apple Books. You can learn more about it and download the bonuses at my website, tocculture.com. According to Professor Anita Willie's research over the last 2 decades at Carnegie Mellon, if a group includes more women, its collective intelligence rises. Well, I'm excited to announce that the Coaching Culture podcast is getting a serious upgrade in the new year, as Betsy Butterick will be joining Nate and I as our new co-host. Betsy will co-host interviews, as well as she'll join us once every 3 weeks for a discussion around a topic that we think will be of value to the listeners of the podcast. The next 2 episodes of the podcast, you'll get to meet and learn about Betsy, her journey, and her work with coaches, which is so very similar to the work that I've done with coaches at TOC these last 7 years. I first learned about Betsy through the encouragement of a coach I work with, and then I started to listen to her on other podcasts as I was in search of more female leaders to bring as guests to the podcast. Sometime during the summer, I made the commitment to do a better job of giving women a voice in the podcast and within my books. And in listening to Betsy on other podcasts and then having some conversations with her to get to know her, I was actually just blown away by her first as a person. Like, I knew instantly she was a person of high character. And she was also a great communicator and coach of coaches, and I had much to learn from her. She is a certified leadership coach like myself and works with coaches and their teams and does incredible work in that space. And I am excited to introduce you to not only our guest on the next 2 episodes of the podcast, but our new co-host starting in 2024, Betsy Butterick. Welcome to the Coaching Culture Podcast, the podcast to help you grow as a leader and build a better culture. I'm JP Nurbin, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host Nate Sanderson. In addition to this podcast, I'm a leadership coach and culture consultant. To learn more about how my business TOC can support you and your organization, visit tocculture.com. Coach, don't forget to subscribe to the TOC newsletter. Every Thursday, you'll receive a short article, and you'll also receive the notes to each episode of the podcast, as well as our top 10 podcast episodes and my top 10 articles. Subscribe using the link in the description of this episode, or simply go to tocculture.com and click on newsletter.
Well, Betsy, we're excited for you to join us on the podcast here. You and I spent a little bit of time kind of getting ready for this conversation. And where I'd like to start your story here is thinking back to your experience as an athlete. And one thing I just find fascinating about your story in general is you have this transition from being a really successful high school athlete with Division 1 ambitions, and then settle into another place in Division 3 to play, but then also get into coaching and then eventually coaching the coaches. And so you've got this vast experience where you've seen the game and you've seen cultures from all kinds of different perspectives. But let's start as an athlete and maybe just talking a little bit about what was that experience like, going from a high school player with big ambitions and kind of working your way through your college experience.
Absolutely. And first of all, thanks, Nate and JP, for having me on. It's great to have conversations with both of you. My big aspirations really started when I was 11, and that was when my family moved from Pennsylvania to the Bay Area of California. And also the time when I immediately fell in love with Stanford women's basketball. And I went to games as a kid, and that was the dream from the time I was 11, was if I could get admitted to Stanford, then maybe I could try out as a walk-on. And at the time, Archbishop Mitty High School had a player who was a few years older than me that had done that same path. So she tried out as a walk-on and then ended up earning a scholarship. So I saw it as possible. I was the only person in my family that played basketball, and we knew very little about what it took to earn a college scholarship, as far as you should play for this club team and, you need to work with these people. So we were really learning as we went. And my path involved applying to Stanford, getting rejected out of high school, and then enrolling in the local junior college program, so Foothill Junior College. And funny enough, my English professor is the late mother of Kate Pay. Kate Pay is still on Tara Vanderveer's staff at Stanford. So I was experiencing Stanford women's basketball from a different perspective in the classroom, in English class, while I was at Foothill. And I applied again after my freshman year at Foothill. And got my second rejection letter from Stanford, this time with a nice note from admissions that said, dear Elizabeth, we realize you've applied twice now. We had a very competitive sophomore class. If you decide to apply again, we wish you the best. At that point, I also had on the table a Division I offer. And so I ended up deciding, okay, great to pursue Stanford. It got me to where I am. And I really would like to have college paid for. And so I'm going to accept the offer that I have to play Division I on the East Coast. And so I left Foothill, went to Division I. I spent a season there, and during that season realized that while yes, I had achieved that Division I dream, what I was missing was a real feeling of community. The school I was at was largely a commuter school, except for the athletes. And so there wasn't that sense of community in the college environment that I wanted. And then also academically, while I was very grateful to have school paid for through athletics, it was not the quality academic experience that I was looking for. And layer onto that, within my sport experience, I remember I woke up in a hotel room. Gosh, we were on the road in Virginia. And as you know from traveling, sometimes you wake up and it takes you a second to remember where you are. And I remember I woke up in the hotel room in Virginia, had that experience of not immediately knowing where I was. And then as soon as that came into clarity, I was immediately just overwhelmed with this feeling of deep sadness. And this had been building for a while. And what I realize now, years later, is that I was absolutely having a mental health crisis brought on by different elements of my sport experience up until that point. And so I did the thing I'd never done before, which was I quit the team. And I was a captain. I'd been elected captain by my teammates as a transfer. I really enjoyed my team. And I'd reached a breaking point for myself personally where I knew that if I continued doing what I was doing, I'm not sure what was going to come next. And I'd say as a leader, but also as someone who feels deeply indebted to or grateful for the opportunity I've been given, quitting was very hard to do. I'd also been told so many times in my life by various coaches, what a quitter is and isn't. And so that was a hard identity for me to come to grips with. And yet quitting the team, moving back to California, re-enrolling in school at Claremont McKenna Division III, finding not only my love for sport again, but also having such a rich academic environment, small class sizes. There was so much joy that came next from, peaks and valleys. You think about one of the lowest points for myself as an athlete collegiately to two of the best years, both athletically and academically, that I could have experienced. And just really the perspective it gave me to go high school, junior college, Division I, Division III, very non-traditional path. And the insights that I gained during that time have absolutely lent themselves in valuable ways to the work that I'm able to do now with coaches and teams of all levels.
Betsy, in some ways, our story parallels so many ways. Like I was hung up on this Division I aspiration, wanted to get there and got there. And similar to you, my experience was not what I had envisioned, playing for the
Yeah.
University of South Carolina. There's many positive things, but being on national TV, travel, all those types of things, playing with some guys you were watching the year before on TV, like the experience is kind of it is special. But I resonate too with the kind of those mental health challenges. I'm curious when you think about experience. You talked about how the experience, the connection wasn't there, and like you kind of tied that
Mm.
with the mental health aspect. And I think so often, like today's athletes, we just think, oh, a great experience for them is a lot of playing time. And if they're not having a lot of playing time, they're having a negative experience. But I think
Mm-hmm.
you have a deeper insight and more awareness. So when you think about that experience, what was lacking from that experience in the team dynamics there that you were able to find on your next stop? Because I'm sure that influences very much your work with teams today.
Absolutely. And I'll say for me at the time, I felt great connection with my teammates. It was with the coaches specifically and the head coach more specifically at the time where that level of support, that level of psychological safety, of unconditional positive regard. When I do athlete interviews at all levels, the thing that consistently comes back in answer to the question, who is your favorite coach and why, is that their favorite coach was someone they knew cared about them as a person separate from how they played or performed. And for me, that wasn't present in that space. and again, not to throw any individual under the bus, I think people were doing the best that they could at that time. But the disconnect that I felt was really value as a person separate from whatever was happening on the court. In the work that I do now, I've consistently seen teams maybe that aren't winning as frequently as they'd like to, even as frequently as they'd like to yet, or let's say really high performing teams who experience unexpected upsets or loss that still have great experiences because of the quality of connection that exists within the program. So for me, especially if we look across sport, specifically in the United States, the way that we have transitioned out of transactional coaching to transformational coaching. And if I had to sum it up, I'd say that was the environment that I found myself in for Division I, was a very transactional relationship, specifically as a player with the coaches. The transformational relationship, the valuing people over playing time over skills, seeing their inherent value and worth separate from their abilities or inabilities as an athlete, that really for me is the connective piece that I see as a hallmark of people that have great experiences, not just players, not just coaches, but people together in quality programs have wonderful experiences. It's less about the wins and losses and more about what's the connection like? What's the quality of connection like? What are the relationships like? And that's what I've seen to be true in my work.
Yeah, let me just pull a little bit more on that feeling cared about, that relationship from your coach. My high school coach would say the way that he shows his care was to yell and scream at you and get on
Mm,
you every day
yeah,
in a very transactional way. So, and obviously I didn't feel cared about in that moment there. But what do you need, or what do you see in your experience as an athlete, but also in so many other athletes, both female and male athletes? Like, what is that thing that's lacking in the relationship so often that they need from their coaches that says, "Hey, I care about you and you matter."
yeah, yeah. Well, it's interesting because I get to see both sides, right? In the work that I do with athletes and the work that I do with coaches, I hear the same desire. There's that desire for care, that's the desire for connection. What I hear from athletes is, I know, in air quotes, I know coach cares about me, but what I hear from coaches is, I really care about these kids and I want them to know it. For me, it's like, okay, both of us, we feel like we're missing each other. What's that about? What I've, in an observational way, what I've seen it be about is there's the known element of care, and then there's the demonstrated and felt element of care. And I read something on social media. I forget the origin of the post. It was a short video clip, and a guy was saying, your responsibility is not to get something off your chest to alleviate what you're feeling. Your responsibility is to get what's off your chest, get something off your chest, but in a way that it lands well in somebody else's chest. And I love this idea of like, yes, you can say that you care as a coach about your athletes. You as an athlete can know cognitively that your coach cares about you, but are you also feeling that emotionally? What are the behaviors inherent in care? What are the actions that are observable, let's say even by a third party like myself? If I'm watching practice, what does care look like? From player to player, from player to coach, from coach to player, among staff members? What do we see in terms of care that tells me that this is a priority for everyone?
Coach, if creating a great culture is overwhelming for you, or just simply seems like a roll of the dice every year, then you need to check out my book, The Culture System, which will teach you to develop your leadership philosophy and stay grounded while also growing and evolving. It will help you to grow and strengthen your relationships with your team members, as well as empower your team to help you establish support and enforce high standards. Lastly, it will help you create a customized culture system for your team and implement it layer by layer. It's available on Amazon and Apple Books. You can learn more about it and download the bonuses at my website, tocculture.com.
So I'm curious. I'm just going to lean on this one more time here, but a coach that says, I just don't, I want to be in that space. I don't know how.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah,
understand why they don't know that I care. We hear that a lot, right? Especially as,
yeah.
look, I'm getting older, right? So, it's harder as you get older and there's more, I think, years in between. So, where does a coach start, or what is a coach missing in terms of players understanding that they really do care?
For me, it's, if you are a coach who feels like, Betsy, my players should know that I care. I say it all the time. I care about you. I want you to know that I care about you. For me, if that has been a path that a coach feels they've exhausted or been very clear about, it's no longer about the telling, it's about the doing. And the doing does not need to be grand gestures. I actually think that those grand gestures are, while they're great as one-offs, are less effective over time. For me, it's really about consistent quick touches. And sometimes that quick touch is physical, a fist bump, a high five. Sometimes it's eye contact. Sometimes it's using that individual's name in the context of a way that's positive. Listening to the podcast that you all have done and talking about the difference between affirmation and praise. So can we make small shifts that, in service of creating a caring environment, not only reinforce what an individual has done, the outcome, the product, but also reinforce who the individual is? Can we use language and affirmation as a way to validate that a human being has value and worth? And can we see that in them? Can we name that in them? Can we support the growth and development of that element of their being, separate from anything having to do with our sport? So for me, care often shows up less as what we say or telling people that we care, and more, I'll ask coaches sometimes, okay, if you didn't get to tell your athletes that you cared, how would they know? If you couldn't use words, how would you make sure that the conviction you're telling me now that you care about your athletes, how would you make sure that they know? What does that look like for you? And that becomes a starting point for behavior shifts or modifications that create a greater element of care being present and visible and felt in their program.
Well, this is a fascinating perspective on coaching that you have now. And kind of the next part of your story is your transition from player to coach. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that sort of chapter in your life here, and just how you got into coaching in the first place.
So I have Tara Vanderveer at Stanford to thank for my transition into coaching. When I got rejected from Stanford out of high school, I began coaching basketball camp in the summer for Tara. And over the course of my life, I coached 14 years of summer camp at Stanford University. And it was the summer before my junior year of college that Tara said, hey, when you graduate after senior year, do you want to come back and intern with our program? I fell in love with Stanford when I was 11. And then at 22, I actually got to go back and be part of the staff there. And that was the beginning of my coaching journey. I didn't know at the time that I wanted to coach. What I knew is that I love psychology. That was my major. And I didn't want to go clinical. At that point in my life, I'd yet to develop the skills that allowed me as a very empathetic individual to not take on everybody else's stuff. And I knew that if I went clinical, it was going to burn me out, kind of take me down fairly quickly. And so I loved people and coaching in my experience through sport. And I played a variety of sports growing up. So many wonderful people contributed to my life, my growth, my development through being my coach. So I knew coaching was a special thing. And the joke while I was coaching basketball was always that I liked basketball. What I really loved was people. And so I started at Stanford as an intern. During that season, Tara Vanderveer's youngest sister, Heidi, at the time was coaching in the WNBA with the Seattle Storm, opposite seasons. And so Heidi was with us for the college season. At one point, she invited at the time, the head coach of the Seattle Storm, Ann Donovan, who's since passed. She invited Ann down to a game. We met in the hallway at halftime while I was folding towels and did a quick interview. And Ann said, yeah, she'll do. And so as soon as I finished the college season, I went up to Seattle. I was part of their staff as the equipment manager. Sue Bird, Lauren Jackson were on the team at the time. I was now 23 and just had a phenomenal summer traveling the country with the WNBA team. From there, the University of Washington hired an all-new women's basketball staff, and I got on as the video coordinator. And then after that year, Heidi got out of the pros and back into college, becoming the head women's basketball coach at Occidental College. So Division III also happened to be in the conference that I played in when I was at Claremont McKenna. So Heidi asked me to come be her assistant. We were there for 4 years at Oxy and then 3 years at UC San Diego. Heidi is still the head coach at UC San Diego. And I would have stayed Heidi's assistant for forever if I'd not found out that coaching was something that existed outside of sport. And as soon as I knew that that was an option, immediately in my chest, in a very visceral way, it was like, yeah, that's the thing. That's the thing I feel most called to do. But I want to put it back into sport because in my experience, both as an athlete and then as a coach at all different levels, the consistent need that I saw was for there to be someone that existed in support of coaches that wasn't tied to a paycheck or politics. Someone that was really just there to help a coach be at their best so they could then give their best to the athletes in the program. And that was the space that I felt called to serve in.
Yeah, and I wonder, you're on this climbing the ladder in coaching. and you're in some really high level coaching circles very quickly. In fact, I remember hearing you talk about on a podcast earlier about how you were on, someone said you're on the fast track to greatness or something to that effect.
Yep.
One thing I think a lot of coaches struggle with is being on that ladder and recognizing they're happy where they're at, or maybe moving down, or maybe pivoting like you did and completely getting off. Like, or what was it about that experience that really pulled you away from that ladder, that fast track to greatness, as I think one coach told you?
Yeah, and that was the conversation that I had when I left Washington. Heidi had asked me to come be her assistant at Division 3, and my head coach at the time said, "Betsy, you've worked for 2 Olympic coaches in 2 years. You're on the fast track to Division 1 greatness. This is the worst decision you will ever make in your professional career." What I'd seen in my professional career, also in my playing career, was if this is what Division 1 is, it's not what I want for my life. And no judgment on those that have chosen it for theirs. There were other things for me that were a higher priority than that fast track to greatness, or whatever greatness looked like. Because if greatness also comes at the expense of spending time with kids, which I knew I wanted to have a family at some point, if that's what it meant, then it wasn't for me. You mentioned, JP, moving down. I think that that's something that for me was a light bulb moment throughout my career as well. As when I was in high school, we were sold, we meaning my club team, other people who were looking to play collegiately, we were sold it was Division 1 or bust. Like your aspiration should absolutely be to play Division 1 as high level as you can. And if you're not that good, then maybe look at Division 2 or Division 3. And I remember getting to Division 3, and while our point guard was 5'2" instead of 5'8", the competitiveness was still incredibly high. The body size was different. There were still incredibly skilled athletes playing the game. And I remember thinking, wow, that's such a shame that the message we were given largely as athletes in high school is you should aspire to play Division 1. And then coaching in Division 1, Division 2, Division 3, getting to have greater insight into what does it look like as the curator of that experience for athletes? Who are the individuals that we're asking to be part of that experience? There's so much richness. And again, it was this weighty moment of, oh my gosh, we are doing such a disservice to people when we only sell them one preferred avenue for success. So if this is what greatness looked like, it wasn't for me. What I wanted was to be really great wherever I was and to work with high quality people. And I knew Heidi was a high quality person. And I knew that anything that we did at any level was going to be great because of the values that we shared and the experience that we were committed to creating for the young people that were part of our program.
I want to ask you this question, and I find your perspective there interesting because if you read about Brad Stevens' background, he talks about playing Division 3 basketball at DePaul and says, "Look, what I learned there was playing for championships is playing for championships. It doesn't matter how big the bodies are or what everybody else says. When you get an opportunity, it's great, right?" And he's even made that comment when he was with the Celtics. But when you look back at your coaching career, what do you think is the biggest difference, just your growth as a coach from your first year on the sidelines in your first experience to your last season as a coach before stepping out?
Oof. And this is a challenge I say only because 7 of the 10 years I coached college basketball, it was with Heidi. And so, I was Stanford trained, and then I was, Vanderveer aligned, I'll say, for much of my college career. But even within my experience, if I just look at, let's say, Tara and Heidi, so Stanford and then Occidental and UC San Diego, both brilliant basketball minds, both very different personalities. And I took so much from both of them. I have never been in film sessions the way I was deep in film sessions with Tara. I mean, she can watch films for hours and see things that were completely off my radar until she pointed them out. I remember one of the more poignant moments for me my first year coaching on the sidelines with Tara was we were walking across the gym after shoot around. It was just the two of us in the gym. And she looked up, and the way the sunlight was coming in through the arena, you could see all these smudges on the backboard. And she said, "Betsy, if you wouldn't mind, can you find some Windex, grab the ladder, and just go up and clean that backboard? It shouldn't look like that." And I remember thinking, this is the level of detail that supports greatness, the level of thinking. I remember another time when I spent, it was close to an hour taping down 3-point lines on the side baskets within Maple's Pavilion because we were going to do a certain drill that Tara had specified from our practice meeting that day. We had our meeting. Betsy took rolls of tape, a string, and did the work to put 3-point lines down. Tara comes down to practice and she says, "Oh, Betsy, go ahead and take those up. We're not going to do that anymore." And so in that moment, it was like, oh, wait, what? Like, I just put all this, meticulous time and energy into getting these perfectly arced 3-point lines out of painter's tape, which is difficult to do. And now with a split second, we need to take it up. So in my first year, I was learning the importance of attention to the details, also the value of flexibility, of being able to let go of your attachment to one thing in service of whatever's needed now. And that was such an important lesson for me, not only as a coach of sport, but then moving into this realm of coaching people. I think about my last year at UCSD, and that was really we'd hit our stride. I mean, between the two locations, Heidi and I were able to help win 5 championships in 7 years at 2 different divisions. And so what we were doing was working really well. And the recipe for success that Heidi onboarded me to was our only focus every year was to make sure every person on our roster felt seen, valued, and appreciated. And we knew that the winning would come if we invested in those areas, separate from playing time, separate from skill. Every person feels seen, valued, and appreciated. And so I had that foundation. And I would say taking that into the work that I do now of whatever's happened in someone's past, wherever they are currently, the work is not mine to judge how they've been or who they've been or what's happened. It's to meet them where they are and make sure that in the work that we do together, especially when it gets challenging, which it does. Like you said, the work to win championships is the same regardless of level. So the work to grow and develop, whether it's athletes coaching in a sports context or people in an executive coaching context, that work is challenging. How do you maintain the core relationship, the connection, the support of someone as you walk them through that journey?
Yeah, that seen, valued, appreciated. I often talk about being seen, known, loved. It just kind of resonates there. And I'm curious from Heidi's perspective or your perspective on Heidi's coaching, what is the number one way that she demonstrates that or helps athletes to feel that they are seen and they're known and they're appreciated?
Great question. Heidi's highly relational. I remember, I think it was the last Final Four we went to together. We're coming down the elevator. This was in New Orleans, and it was close to midnight. And we're going down the elevator, and Heidi looks down, and she realizes she's wearing a UC San Diego sweatshirt. And so she quickly takes it off, and she turns it inside out, right? Because we were going to go to karaoke at this bar, and Heidi doesn't drink, but she also was responsible for representing UC San Diego, and so she wanted to turn her sweatshirt inside out. And I laughed because I said, "Oh, Heidi, that's really funny that you think if you just turn your sweatshirt around, people aren't going to know who you are." But that's how she sees herself. She does not see herself as a big deal. She never has. She's a very relational person. And long before anyone was actually on our roster, through the recruiting process, through any time they spent with Heidi, you knew that what you had to offer in terms of basketball was not the most important thing that she valued. She was so intentional about getting to know people, and not just the person, but what mattered to them, whether it was a pet or a member of their family or a different hobby or activity that they had, an academic pursuit. And she would genuinely, and that's the real key, I'll say, hallmark of how Heidi made people feel that way, is it was genuine. And I see a lot of people with really good intentions try to do that. When they miss the genuine component, it's not received well. Heidi's actions always matched with what she said. And that consistency over time, that intentional value placed on getting to know the person and starting there before we ever get into the basketball, I'd say that was really the hallmark of, I think, what made her successful in that pursuit.
All right, we'll take a pause there in our conversation with Betsy. Her website is betsybutterick.com, and we'll include all her links in the details of this episode. Some important things to take away from our conversation. I think, first off, the value of support for coaches that isn't tied to a paycheck, politics, or a scoreboard. I think that's really profound. And I look back at my own experience, and one of the most profound growth experiences for me was working with a coach back in 2016. I owe so much to Jamie Gilbert, who was my coach at the time. I want to encourage coaches listening to really hone in on one part of Betsy's story. I think the interesting thing is that many coaches are guilty like players of thinking D1 or bust, or getting to some level of coaching, or they aren't successful until they get to that level. Instead, we should really be asking what level works for us. It could be Division 1, it could be high school, it could be youth, it could be professional. Now, honestly, one of the greatest sources of joy for me in the last year has been coaching my 7-year-old's team the last year in football. At the same time, I just came back from a trip working with some high performance coaches and athletes at USA Women's National Field Hockey Team. And I can tell you that was a special experience. Joy can be found in both. I think the question for us is more about, what do we want our life to look like? As my friend Jerry Lynch once told me, we need to build our jobs around our life, not our life around our jobs. So some food for thought for all you coaches out there. Thanks for listening into the Coaching Culture Podcast. Be sure to subscribe where you listen to podcasts. Be sure to also share this episode if you found it valuable. And if you haven't done so already, please leave the podcast a review. It helps to spread our message.